In the quiet, breathing dark beneath the crust of the world, where sunlight was only a rumor passed between old crystals and stalactites, there was a town called Glorest. It sat inside the mouth of an ancient cavern known as the Hollow Grove, a space wide enough to house dreams. The ceiling shimmered with dripstone and moss light. Veins of glowing fungus threaded along the walls like sleepy constellations. The floor was soft with black loam and root lace, and at its center sat the town, a ring of warm-lit homes carved from stone, bonewood, and the occasional fallen geode. Glorest never bustled. It hummed. The town's residents were mostly deep folk, stout, kind-eyed, thick-browed people who spoke slowly and sang often. They wore woven root cloth and pale clay beads. They kept their lamps low, their hearths fed with slow-burning fire peat, and they measured time by echo rather than hour. Each day began not with sunrise, but with the first echo. A soft, natural reverb sent out by the town's ancient bellstone. When the stone was tapped, its sound circled the walls of the Hollow Grove and returned after exactly 7 breaths. That was morning. And on this morning, Nia Feldspar slept through it. The chime of first echo rang. And then second. And third. By the time Nia stirred, her cave was already lit with the sleepy blue of shroomlight. Her ceiling ferns had uncurled, her stone kettle was piping quietly, and the gravel bird outside her hollow let out a disapproving peep. Nia bolted upright, sending a pile of dream journal pages skittering to the floor. Oh no, oh no, oh. She scrambled into her root-weave shawl, pulled on her boots with one hand, and snatched up her satchel, which still smelled faintly of chalk and burned sage from the last time she'd practiced echo mapping. The waykeeper would be waiting. Glorest's waykeeper, Master Doran, was a patient man. But his patience had a texture, a kind of soft grit. When stretched too far, it made the room feel like cold stone after a warm soak. Nia found him where she always did, by the hearth marker at the town's central axis, a smooth bowl of red glass that glowed with a soft inner fire. He wore his long cloak of echo-stitched thread, his beard tied with tiny moss bells. He was tapping notes into the stone with his walking staff. "You're late," he said without looking. "I know," Nia said, breathless. "I'm sorry." You're always late." She shuffled. "And you always apologize." He turned. "But you're also always worth waiting for." Nia blinked. "Now," he said, pointing with his staff, "come listen to the deep." They walked the slow steps down into the echo chambers, the twisting stone spirals beneath Glorest where whispers bounced and time flowed like water around rock. Waykeepers were trained to read these echoes, to listen for changes in the world through its reverberations. One could hear root shifts, beetle migrations, even distant collapses in long-forgotten tunnels. Nia had the gift. She didn't just hear the echo. She felt it. They paused at the second ring chamber, where an old bellvine wrapped the wall. "Sit," Doran said. Nia did. He handed her a stone sphere. "Smooth. Cored with a single glowing vein. Drop it." She did. The sound echoed outward in a soft plip. They waited. Then it returned, plip, but different. "Did you feel it?" he asked. Nia's brow furrowed. "Yes." It came back, lighter. Like it passed through something soft. Doran nodded. "There's water moving in the root reach. And something else." He leaned closer. "There's a new echo beneath the stone." That night, Nia sat on the edge of her sleeping platform, journal open, eyes wide. A new echo. It wasn't unheard of. The underground changed slowly but always, roots shifted, chambers collapsed, creatures burrowed where they didn't belong. But something about the way Doran had said it unsettled her. He'd never said new like that before. Not curious. Reverent. Almost afraid. She picked up her chalk and sketched what she felt in her bones, a spiral. A coil deep beneath the mapped caverns. Not a cave. Not a tunnel. A heartbeat. The next day, Master Doran sent Nia to the Resonance Archive, a quiet library carved from polished basalt where echo charts were etched into stone slabs and stored by weight and tone rather than by subject. "Look for anything that's ever echoed back from the root reach," he said, handing her a wrapped bundle of moss bread and a thermos of kettle root tea. "Compare the old charts to what you heard yesterday." Nia loved the archive. It smelled like minerals and ink and the pages of very old questions. The archivist on duty, a whisper-thin woman named Cyril, nodded at her but didn't speak. No one did, except the stones. She rolled open the hanging slate map of the root reach. It was almost comically out of date, the deepest marks were at least a generation old. Still, she scanned it with a practiced ear, tapping the annotated grooves, listening as each line rang back its history. Then she found it. A soft ring just left of center, slightly under a shaft marked collapsed. Only, it wasn't marked as collapsed on her version of the map. It was marked silent. Nia frowned. Silence wasn't the same as collapse. Echoes didn't lie. They just stopped when there was nothing left to listen to. But yesterday, she'd heard something come back from that direction. Something warm. Something alive. She didn't tell Doran. Not yet. It wasn't disobedience, exactly. Just something she needed to hear for herself first. So that night, while Glowrest hummed in soft evening lullabies, Nia wrapped a red moss scarf around her shoulders, packed a satchel with chalk, twine, and her echo stone, and crept out along the forgotten path toward the silent place. She took the back tunnels. Ones rarely walked. Places where the shroomlight faded and the roots grew slow and thoughtful. The silence grew deeper as she descended. Eventually, she reached a low shelf in the stone wall, worn down by ages of windless time. She set down her satchel, took out her echo stone, and placed it gently on the ground. She whispered, "Tell me what's still breathing down here." She tapped it. Plip. Silence. Then, thum. Not a bounce. A response. Nia froze. Echoes didn't respond. They reflected, repeated, replayed. The voice of stone was always a mirror, not a mouth. But what she heard now wasn't an echo. It was a voice, folded in vibration. A slow, deep murmur passed beneath her feet. Not words. Not yet. But something like intent. Like a cave remembering its name. The ground warmed. Her echo stone pulsed faintly. Then she heard it again, clearer this time. "Come in." She backed away, heart hammering. Stones didn't speak. At least not like this. Unless it wasn't the stone at all. Unless something inside the stone had woken up. She didn't sleep. She returned to Glowrest just before the third echo, her boots dusted in pale soil, her fingers cold from the stone's breath. She told no one. Instead, she spent the next day poring through the archive's soft texts, clay-leaf journals and thin-thread histories from the old waykeepers. She found nothing titled, nothing direct. But between the lines of faded ink and cracked parchment, she saw patterns. Places marked silent weren't always collapsed. Some were sealed. And some of those seals were sung into place. Old protection songs. Forgotten by most. There was one name that kept surfacing, only once or twice, and never fully. Deepwarm. As if it were a place. Or a person. Or both. "You've been walking differently," Master Doran said the next morning, not looking up from his breakfast stone. Nia paused mid-step. "I have?" "Your gait's tight. Listening in your hips. That means you've been moving through older stone. Not town stone. Wild stone." She winced. He finally looked at her. "Whatever you heard, it called to you. I can't fault you for answering." Her shoulders sagged. "But," he said gently, "you shouldn't go alone next time." Nia nodded slowly. "Next time?" Doran took another sip of kettle root. There's always a next time when the Deepwarm stirs. They set out by second echo. Doran walked with the slow steadiness of stone shaped by time, no rush, no hesitation. Nia kept pace, her satchel lighter now, but better packed, a thicker scarf, a triple-wrapped echo stone, and a sealed bottle of whisper milk tea. They descended together into the forgotten tunnels, where the moss grew long-bearded and pale, and the air held the breath of centuries. When they reached the shelf, Nia knelt again, placing her echo stone just as before. "Wait," Doran said, placing a hand on her shoulder. He knelt beside her, opened a small pouch, and scattered dust over the floor. Finely ground root clay mixed with chime quartz. As it settled, tiny flickers of motion danced in the dust. Nia gasped. The echo was still alive, still breathing beneath their feet. "It's not just an opening," Doran said quietly. "It's a waiting place." "Waiting for what?" He looked at her, serious, but not afraid. "For someone to knock politely." They tried humming the old waykeeper tones first. Nothing. Then a low drumbeat pattern with footfall rhythm. Still nothing. Finally, Doran turned to Nia. "What did you do the first time?" "I just listened. And asked." "Try again." So Nia closed her eyes, placed both palms on the stone, and whispered, not in command, not in desperation. Just an invitation. "I'm here. If you are." There was a pause. Then a faint warmth pressed into her palms. Not hot. Just welcoming. The stone shifted. Not violently. It didn't break or crack. It simply unfolded, like a blooming moss frond. Beneath the shelf, a spiral staircase revealed itself, carved in layers of smooth basalt and embedded with tiny shards of fossil light. Doran raised an eyebrow. "Well then." Nia stood, her voice small. "I didn't mean to." "You meant exactly to. That's why it listened." He gestured toward the staircase. "After you." They descended slowly. The air grew thicker, not with dust, but with intention. Every stone seemed aware of them. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. Held breath. Held thought. At the bottom was a door. But it didn't look like one. It was a circle of obsidian, fused into the wall, etched with patterns that pulsed faintly in rhythm with Nia's heartbeat. "This isn't a wall," Doran whispered. "It's a lid." "What's behind it?" He didn't answer. Because the obsidian had begun to sing. A low, bone-deep hum. Nia reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the circle, the patterns flared. She didn't hear a voice. She heard a room remembering itself. Then a single word echoed through her entire body. "Welcome." And the door opened. Inside was warmth. Not heat, not fire, but a living warmth that pulsed with calm. The chamber was vast and round, its walls lined with old root systems that had grown into symbols, spirals, spirals within spirals, some so old they no longer touched anything but memory. At its center was a platform. And on that platform sat a stone hearth, glowing softly with a coal that never burned out. It looked ordinary. But Nia stepped forward, drawn. Doran didn't stop her. She knelt beside the hearth, placed her hand near the coal, and whispered, "What are you?" The coal flared, and her vision swam. She saw flashes. A time when this place was full of voices. A council of stone keepers, each wrapped in echo thread. A ceremony where a young child placed her hand on this very hearth and sang. Then, nothing. Then her own face, reflected in the glow. When she came back to herself, Doran was kneeling beside her. "You saw it?" She nodded. "It remembers." "And now," he said softly, "it's remembering through you." They camped that night in the threshold chamber. Doran took first watch, though Nia doubted anything dangerous would approach. The air here was thick with protection. It wasn't a warded place, it was a welcoming place, made only for those who asked to be part of it. She sipped her tea and wrote in her journal. This isn't just a chamber. It's a story that got buried too deep. The kind that roots around in your bones until you remember it back into the world. The coal still glowed beside her. Not brighter. Just steadier. Like it was waiting for her to light the rest of the way. And in that moment, Nia knew. The Deepwarm wasn't a place. It was a promise. In the morning, though time was little more than rhythm this far down, Nia awoke to find the coal beside her glowing in pattern. It pulsed in 3 slow beats, paused, then repeated. When she reached toward it, the pulses changed: 4, pause, 2, pause, 3. It was speaking. No, not speaking. It was remembering in rhythm. She called Doran over, and together they began to track the patterns. Nia drew lines with chalk on the smooth chamber floor while Doran hummed soft echo tones, listening for tonal keys. Then, after an hour of this silent song, Nia gasped. It's not a code. Doran looked up. It's a map. The pulses were directions, layered loops of ancient path markings. Not to a physical place, but to another hearth, buried even deeper than this one. One that had never been opened. They followed the rhythm map, moving deeper into the underways. The stones shifted as they passed, not physically, but musically. Each chamber had its own key, its own feeling, and if they stepped in harmony with the rhythm, the way opened easier. Doran called it thread walking, a skill from the earliest waykeepers. Stone doesn't forget, he said. It just quiets until someone asks nicely. Eventually, they reached a passage with no door, only a song. Faint tones echoed from the walls, like a lullaby hummed by the bones of the world. Nia listened, humming back until she found the note that vibrated her ribs. Then the stone parted. No cracks, no rubble. It simply let go. The room beyond was unlike any they'd seen. Lined with crystal shelves, each filled with embers tones, small, glowing fragments of past events, stored like stories waiting to be read. They pulsed faintly when Nia stepped near. She touched one. A memory poured into her, a waykeeper teaching a young acolyte to trace echo paths. Another ember showed a child's first song to the coal fire. Another, a warning. If the Deepwarm flickers, the echo must be carried again. Doran watched her in silence. This place, Nia whispered, was built to remember everything we forgot. She picked up a coal from a pedestal, and it warmed instantly in her hand. Not just memory. Meaning. At the far end of the Ember Library, nestled in a hollow cut from stone that shimmered with mother-of-pearl lichen, sat a small figure. A woman. Old. Still. Not asleep, but waiting. Her skin was root-lined, her hair dusted with lichen, and her eyes faintly glowing. When Nia approached, the woman opened her mouth and sang. Not words, tones. Deepwarm tones. Nia answered without thinking. The woman smiled, softly. You carry it, she said in a voice like carved wood. The warmth that listens back. Who are you? Nia asked. The woman tilted her head. The last who remembered. Until now. Then she pressed her palm to Nia's forehead. And Nia saw everything. Flashes surged through Nia's mind. A village, ancient and bright, clustered around a coal like the one she'd found. Children learning echo songs as naturally as they breathed. Waykeepers not as guides, but as listeners, those who heard what the stone needed. Then, one day, a long silence. A collapse. A ceiling. The Deepwarm buried, not by accident, but by choice. We are not ready, they had said. Let the warmth rest until the world is quiet enough to feel it again. And now, generations later, it had opened again. For her. When the vision faded, the woman was gone. Only a cloak remained, folded neatly where she had sat. It was woven with fire thread. And Nia knew she was now its keeper. When they emerged days later, the Glowrest folk stared in quiet awe. Not in fear. But reverence. Because Nia didn't return the same. She walked with the stillness of deep stone, and something in her eyes shimmered like a hearth long banked but never dead. The coal from the heart chamber glowed gently in her hands. Master Doran made no speech. He simply placed a pebble in her palm, an old waykeeper's tradition, and nodded once. She had gone deeper than any of them, and returned not with power, but with remembrance. The Glowrest Council did not call a gathering. There was no ceremony. No announcement. No declaration that Nia Feldspar, apprentice no more, had become a keeper of the Deepwarm. But the people knew. They felt it in her footsteps, calm as water through rock. They heard it in her silences, full, not empty. Children began leaving tiny offerings outside her stone hollow, bits of carved root, shimmer shells, fire lantern petals. A few asked shyly if she would listen to the floor for them, in case their dreams had left marks underground. She never said yes. She just smiled, knelt, and placed her hand to the hearth. Master Doran still taught, but now with her instead of to her. They began rebuilding the old way paths between Glowrest and the deeper echo chambers. Nia traced the rhythm lantern routes, using patterns the Deepwarm had shown her. She taught younglings how to recognize friendly echo rings versus forgotten ones. She taught them to say please to the stone. It wasn't long before folk from other hollows came, travelers from the soot-cloaked hamlet of Charist, a moss herder from Dripfold, even a curious trio of honey singers from the waxen city of Orlan. Each brought stories. Questions. Some brought echoes they couldn't explain. Nia listened. And she began to map. One night, a stone-skinned courier arrived from the cliffward deeps. She wore copper glyphs along her arms and spoke in tones sharp as split shale. She carried no message. Only a song. It was sealed in a memory knot, an old waykeeper ritual. A tightly bound spool of woven tone, to be unspooled only by someone trained to bear the resonance. Nia opened it in her stone chamber, Doran at her side. The room sang. And the song was not from their underrealm. It was from outside. The voice in the melody was tired, layered with travel dust and loneliness. If you have remembered the Deepwarm, then I am not alone. I will keep echoing until someone hears me back. Doran sat in stunned silence. That's not a message, he whispered. That's a survivor. Nia's hands shook. The Deepwarm wasn't just returning. It was being sought. Nia spent the next 5 rest cycles tuning her echo stone to the frequency of the memory knot. She sang back, soft tones of invitation, welcome, and home. No reply came. But the rhythm changed. The echoes she cast didn't return the same as before. They curved slightly, warped not by distance, but by intention. She stood beneath the bellstone one night, lantern dimmed, and listened. And far, far, below the hollow grove, beneath even the ember library and the sealed heart paths, she felt it. A new warmth. Not the Deepwarm she knew. But a second hearth, different, uncertain, and waiting. She turned to Doran. I have to go. This time, she didn't sneak away. She packed openly. Glowrest folk brought her supplies, sage honey for calming echoes, flare stones to mark her trail, a carved flute gifted from a tunnel song elder. They didn't stop her. Because they understood. This wasn't adventure. This was answering. She descended beyond any marked map, into chambers not shaped by tools but by intention. Passageways folded around her like thought. Sometimes, she walked for hours and felt she'd gone nowhere. Other times, a single breath carried her 10 layers down. Eventually, she reached the threshold. A wall of basalt, rippling faintly with warm pressure. She pressed her palm to it. The stone pulsed. Come in. The wall of basalt didn't open like a door. It softened, folding like warm clay, and Nia stepped through into a space that hummed, not in her ears, but in her bones. This new chamber was vast and hollowed by natural echo, with walls layered in fireglass and old vein quartz. It was filled with heat, not from fire but from presence. At its center stood a hearth. But this one was cracked. A coal sat at its heart, long cold, ringed in ash that shimmered faintly as if remembering how to glow. Nia approached and knelt. She didn't reach for the coal. She whispered, "I heard you." And the ember pulsed once. Then again. Then came the voice, slow, brittle, and beautiful. "You are late." She turned and saw him. A man, hunched and hollow-eyed, with skin like worn clay and hair bleached white by time. His cloak was layered with patchwork fiber, stitched with forgotten emblems. He leaned on a walking staff made of fused crystal and driftwood. His voice was cracked but whole. "I've been sending this song for 400 seasons." Nia swallowed. "I heard it only last week." He nodded. "You remembered it back into the world." They sat. He told her his name, Eolin. Once a waykeeper. Left behind during a collapse when his echo thread snapped. "But the hearth didn't let me die," he said. "It kept me." Eolin had lived in rhythm with the Deepwarm, its warmth sustaining him in dreams and pulses, his body slowed, half between time. "When I woke," he said, "the world above was gone. I sent my echo upward, but no one sang back. So he waited. And the hearth waited with him." He showed her his maps, etched into the walls, written in circular script that curved and spiraled with song math and heat flow. A different kind of knowledge. Not charted by distance, but by feel. "You felt it," he said. "That's why you came." Nia nodded. "It was a kindness I didn't expect," he whispered. "To be found by someone who listens." Nia knew what she had to do. She placed the old coal from Glorist's hearth beside the cracked ember. They sat in silence. And she sang. Not words, but rhythm. The pulse of movement. Of return. Of story. The two coals glowed, one soft, one flickering. Eolin closed his eyes. The ember flared. And warmth flooded the chamber. Not searing. Not wild. Just present. And Eolin cried. "I thought I would never be warm again." Eolin could not climb fast. So Nia took them the long way back, through echo-familiar routes, resting often, warming tea over moss fire. He told her stories in pieces. Names of waykeepers she'd only seen mentioned in the Ember Library. Some of those names had been thought myths. But Eolin remembered all of them. When they reached the hollow grove, Glorest stood waiting, not in ceremony, but in quiet welcome. Eolin fell to his knees at the hearth. Not from exhaustion. From joy. The cold air flared. And his did, too. The next day, a new stone was placed in the center of the Glorest Plaza. Unmarked. Smooth. Each day at first echo, Nia tapped it once. Not to begin the day. But to remind the hollow that something had returned. And it did. The second hearth, deep beneath the root of sound, never closed again. Its warmth joined the Deepwarm way. Two flames, burning in chorus. And with them came new travelers. Those who had heard echoes in their dreams. Those who remembered warmth in their bones. Those who had never been told there was a place for them. Nia welcomed them all. It began with one traveler every few days. Then more. Glorest was no longer just a hearth town, it became a listening post, a hub for those who had heard whispers in the stone, dreamt of warmth they couldn't name, or carried old maps that had never led anywhere until now. Moss tents cropped up at the edge of the hollow grove. Clay paths were smoothed by so many feet. Shroom-light lanterns glowed at every ring. A thread singer from the Driftglow chorus brought woven wind hymns and asked to stay. A cartographer from Emberjaw carried broken crystals that hummed faintly, fragments of Deepwarm echo caught and preserved. A child born in silence, whose parents believed him to be mute, sang a single, perfect note the first time he touched the Glorest coal. Nia didn't plan to start a school. It just happened. She set out extra sitting mats during her morning stonework. She answered questions with chalk sketches. She welcomed those who stayed late, or came back. Soon, there were 10. Then 20. Then a full ring of learners, echo stones in hand, eyes wide. She taught them not just how to listen to stone, but how to feel when it was listening to them. Each student crafted their own rhythm, a signature tone that the stone would recognize. Like a handshake of presence. She never used the word teacher. But the coal glowed warmer each time she sang with them. Elan grew stronger by the day. He carved a small niche for himself near the archive, a shelter of fireglass and root thread. Not alone, but not in the center. He preferred quiet places, still adjusting to time that moved again. But when he spoke, people listened. His stories became bridges, connecting the now with the then. Filling in gaps the Ember Library didn't know it had. One evening, he took Nia aside and said softly, "You gave me more than rescue. You reminded me who I am." She nodded. Then he handed her a stone wrapped in stitched moss. "It's time someone gave that back to you." Inside was a waykeeper's ring, the old kind, fused of coal and fireglass. Hers now. Not earned. Given. The Glowrest Council finally called a gathering. It was dusk cycle. Second echo. The plaza glowed with lantern moss, and every voice was quiet. Nia stood by the bellstone. She didn't wear robes. No titles. Just her old satchel, her coal ring on one finger, and a calmness that came from deep listening. She raised her hand, and the stone hummed. She said only this. "The Deepwarm way isn't a path you walk. It's a warmth you remember. And when you do, you carry it." The stone glowed beneath her. So did the people. And far below, in the second hearth, the coals pulsed an answer. The first branch path began at a moss-cracked tunnel once sealed by silence. It opened with a hum, an echo that rolled out like a deep sigh, and led to a chamber none had entered in 4 generations. Inside were broken tools, faded glyphs, a half-buried ledger of names, and at the very center, a coal. Faint, fragile, but warm. Nia touched it with 2 fingers, closed her eyes, and let it listen. It flared softly, as if exhaling. Doran called it the third hearth, and it was just the start. Within a moon cycle, 2 more were found, one under Sootroot Hollow, another beyond the fungus fields near Cradle Deep. All half-dormant, each with its own echo song, each unique. The Deepwarm way was not a line. It was a web. And Nia was at its center. With new hearths came new people. More than Glowrest had ever known. Tunnels widened. Stone paths reinforced. A secondary bellstone placed along the eastern rim to regulate rhythm overflow. But Nia found herself stretched. Everyone wanted her to listen. To speak. To teach. To solve. She missed her quiet moss niche. Her tea by the single coal. The act of listening not as work, but as presence. One morning she sat beside the Glowrest hearth and whispered, "I can't hold all of this." The coal didn't flicker. It simply warmed her fingers. Not an answer. But a reminder. She didn't need to hold it all. Only the part that sang to her. Doran came to her that evening, carrying a carved staff and a scroll sealed with elder root wax. "You've started something older than we ever dared to revive," he said. "And it needs tending." "I know," she said. "But not just by me." "Exactly." He handed her the scroll. Inside were names. New waykeepers. Chosen not for their skill, but for their listening. At the top, Nia Feldspar, marked not as a waykeeper, but something else. Deep Warden. Not ruler. Not elder. Just the one who first stepped into warmth and said, "You may come in too." Nia smiled. And signed. The first Deepwarm festival began humbly. A circle of singers and stone garden builders. Children tossing echo stones into a listening pool. Warm soup in carved shells. Glowmoth lanterns strung between moss-wrapped pillars. Eowyn spoke a few words, quiet but steady. Doran followed with a brief echo chant. Then Nia stepped forward, holding no staff, wearing no symbols. She tapped her echo stone to the coal. And it pulsed out a tone. That tone circled the hollow grove. And from far away, so faint it was almost imagined, a second tone answered. And then a third. And a fourth. Until the entire cavern sang. Not in perfect harmony, but in presence. After the festival, Nia returned to the old chamber beneath the archive, the one she'd first opened with a whisper. The heart there still pulsed. The coal warm. She sat by it, breathing slow, one palm against stone, the other pressed to her own chest. "You're not the same as you were," she whispered. To herself. To the warmth. "I didn't mean to become all this." And the stone replied. Not in words, but in tone. "You didn't become it. You remembered it." She smiled. Closed her eyes. And sang, not for the world, not for the people. Just for the coal. And herself. It arrived with no courier. Just appeared. A smooth orb of glassy stone, resting on the center of Nia's sitting mat when she returned to her hollow after walking the third hearth trail. It was not warm. But it vibrated, faintly, like a distant bell heard through dream water. Nia touched it, and a jolt passed through her chest. Not pain. Recognition. The stone held no sound, but deep within it was a compressed echo. Not one made by voice or footstep. Something deeper. Older. She took it to the Ember Library. Eowyn studied it under 5 filters, Doran tapped it with 10 tones. None changed it. Until Nia whispered. "I'm here." The stone trembled. And then it sang. Not in a familiar tongue, but in the first language of listening. The melody the stone released was longer than any known echo cycle. Days passed before it finished fully resonating. Nia and the elders recorded every vibration, mapping out the tonal architecture. The patterns were close to Deepwarm, but not quite. More fluid. Less rooted in rhythm. More like memory pouring through water. The echoes told of a people called the Before Keepers, who lived before the echo paths were first cut, before hearths were carved into chambers. They didn't walk tunnels. They flowed through them. And their hearths didn't warm spaces. They warmed stories. Their presence didn't echo back in sound, but in continuation. Eowyn sat silently for hours after hearing it all. Finally, he said. "We thought we revived something ancient." He looked at Nia. "But you answered something even older." Not long after the stone song ended, something unprecedented happened. A small shaft of light, real sunlight, pierced through a crack in the ceiling of the oldest, deepest hearth chamber. It wasn't strong. It didn't hurt. But it was there. The surface world, long forgotten by the Underhollow, had whispered back. The light shimmered against the coal and made it sing brighter. This wasn't intrusion. It was connection. The world above had somehow remembered the warmth below. Glorist's folk gathered around the beam in reverent silence. Nia stood nearest to it. She reached into her satchel and set a fragment of echo stone inside the sunlit pool. It glowed golden. The first sunlight carried echo in Deepwarm history. And it sang not of leaving the dark, but of joining the whole. With each new echo heard and answered, more signs of the Before Keepers emerged. Glyphs in old sealed chambers that matched the echo stone script. Unfinished tunnels that curved in memory-shaped arcs. A cache of thread crystals found in a hollow above a forgotten waterfall, a place Nia only found after a dream of running water and ancient hums. Most remarkable of all was a message written in that same flowing tongue, newly carved and still warm. "We are still listening. You have warmed the path again. Follow it." It was not a call to adventure. It was a welcome. The Before Keepers hadn't disappeared. They had simply waited until someone sang the way home. The Underhollow map could no longer be drawn on flat stone. Too many threads. Too many curves. Too many living paths that shifted in harmony with memory and meaning. So Nia taught people to map by echo, to understand paths not as lines but as relationships. A trail from Glowrest to Sootroot might take an hour one day, 3 the next, depending not on time, but on tone. Some scoffed, but most adjusted. Because it worked. They weren't navigating tunnels. They were navigating remembrance. And in time, Deepwarm wasn't a place. It was the act of carrying warmth where it had been forgotten. She arrived without a name. Only a cloak of layered shale leaf, boots marked by sand rather than soil, and a fractured coal wrapped in whisper thread. The guards at the Hollow Grove gate brought her to Nia gently, saying, "She hasn't spoken. But she listens like one of us." Nia sat with her in the quiet chamber beneath the bellstone. They drank spore tea. Shared silence. Then the stranger pulled back her hood. Her hair was threaded with sun-bleached roots. Her skin bore the pattern of wind-carved stone, smooth in some places, raw in others. Finally, she whispered, "Where I'm from, the warmth left. I carried what was left of it here." She set down the coal shard. It pulsed once, weakly. Then again, brighter. The Deepwarm had never reached her hollow. But it had waited there anyway. The stranger's name was Kale. She came from a place none of Nia's maps marked. Far beyond the fungal fields, past the still-rooted tunnels where even echoes refused to travel. "We had warmth once," Kale explained. "But no songs. Just silence we learned to survive inside." Then, one day, a child in her hollow heard humming in their sleep. Not voice. Not wind. Stone. Remembering. That child was Kale. She listened for years, built echoes in secret chambers, hoping one would reach someone. And when one did, she followed it. Not above ground. Not by map. By pulse. The Deepwarm had never been missing. Just misunderstood. Nia and Kale spent long days together in the Ember Library, comparing coal fragments, recording echo patterns, and layering their memories into new resonance maps. Kale's coal had been broken intentionally. "Someone tried to bury it," she said. "Not out of malice. Out of grief. But even fractured, it sang." And when Nia placed it beside a fresh coal from the Glowrest hearth, both began to hum in a new key, not one either had held before. Eowyn called it a dust path key, made when coals of different stories touch and choose to share. This key didn't open a door. It opened a direction. A path to a new hollow, one no one had ever reached. Yet the stone had already begun to remember it. The path opened with song. Not notes. Steps. Each movement Nia made through the tunnel was echoed by Kale half a pace behind, then Eowyn, then Doran, and a ring of young echo-walkers who had never known silence. The tunnel shaped itself as they moved, stone folding, breath rising, rhythm guiding. It wasn't a march. It was a chorus. At the end of the path was a hollow the size of a cathedral, ribbed in fossil light, filled with the scent of pine marrow and honey clay. And in its center, a coal bigger than any they had ever seen. Dormant. Whole. Waiting. Nia approached the coal. It didn't flicker. Didn't hum. Didn't even breathe. Until Kale stepped forward, too. Together, they placed their palms to the stone. And sang, not a chant, not a key, but a lullaby. A song of leaving warmth, and finding it again. Of hollowed chambers and remembered touch. Of being lost, and still hoping to be found. The coal ignited with a pulse that cracked the very air, not with heat, but presence. It was the source. Not the first Deepwarm. But the first promise that warmth could return. The place they found came to be called Deep Light. It was not built by hand. It had been grown, shaped by old warmth and abandoned when its bearers thought no one would come back. Now, it breathed again. Roots returned to the ceiling. Shroomlight blinked into life like stars. The walls whispered in the Beforekeeper tongue, "You made it back." Glowrest sent builders and gardeners, but deep light did not need much. Its bones remembered care. Its coal remembered song. And so it became a resting place. Not a village. A memory held in stone. Nia dreamed of a spiral. Endless. Shifting. Made of stone, memory, and warmth. But at its center, a voice. One she didn't recognize. Or perhaps one she'd heard only once, long ago, deep beneath the root reach. You carried it far, little one. Now let it carry you. She woke with the feeling that the Deepwarm was no longer something she led. It had woken fully now. And it was moving on its own. Calling others. Changing shape. Becoming what it had always meant to be. A traveler came, months later, wrapped in moss and silence. They wore no badge, no cloak, no thread. Only an echo stone glowing softly against their chest. They approached Nia as if they knew her. But said nothing. Instead, they held out a coal. Still warm. Fresh. From a place none of the known hearths could explain. I didn't light it, they said. It just started one day. In my home. Nia held the coal. Listened. And heard, herself. Not a recording. A memory the stone had carried, long after she'd left it behind. The Deepwarm had begun to listen back. The echo stone the traveler carried was not the only one. Within weeks, more appeared. Coals flickering in hollows far from the mapped threads. Small flames blooming in ancestral chambers that had forgotten they were chambers at all. The most striking part was this. No one had lit them. They simply began. A child in moss pocket woke to warmth beneath her bed. A pair of twin miners in cradle deep uncovered a coal glowing in a wall that hadn't been touched in 500 years. A gardener in floodroot heard a hum in their watering stones, and dug until a hearthstone answered back. When asked what they'd done, the gardener replied, almost sheepishly, I just missed something. And the stone listened. The Deepwarm had started listening first. Eolin coined the phrase. He said it over tea, tracing a fingertip through the condensation on his mug. It's like the warmth is reaching ahead of itself. Like it's made of memory now, not fire. Nia nodded. The Deepwarm was no longer bound by footsteps, by maps, by thread keepers. It had become a field, an ambient presence, invisible but responding to memory, need, sorrow, and yearning. Some hollows were wary. They feared what came unbidden. But most welcomed it like a letter from a long-lost sibling. Even those who didn't believe began sleeping better beside warm stones they'd never owned. The Deepwarm didn't demand belief. Only reverence. The more it grew, the less Nia spoke. Not out of sadness. Out of peace. She still taught. Still walked the echo paths. Still sat beside coal fires and listened to those who needed presence more than answers. But the urgency was gone. She no longer felt like she was carrying something. Now she was part of something that carried everyone. And so, one day, she returned to her favorite moss ring, tucked behind the original Glowrest hearth. She laid down her satchel. Removed her echo stone. Unstrapped her coal ring. And placed them gently in the moss. She whispered, You know the way now. And the stone glowed once. Then rested. Before she left, Nia wrote one last letter. She bound it in root fiber and tucked it behind the bellstone, where young echo keepers would someday find it. It read, You don't need to know the whole map. You only need to listen to where you are. The Deepwarm isn't a path to follow. It's a song that waits for your voice. It was always yours. She signed it not with her name, but with a single drawn spiral. The shape the coal makes when it breathes. Years passed. Stories deepened. Glowrest remained, but it was no longer central. No place was. The Deepwarm had no capital, no crown, no throne. Just coal. And memory. and those who still walked with warmth in their hands and listening in their bones. Sometimes travelers spoke of a quiet woman seen by hearthlight, tending moss with gloved hands and singing a lullaby no one remembered learning. She never said her name, just smiled and nodded, and vanished again. In the center of what was once the glowrest circle, the hearth still burns. It has never gone out. Children still place their hands near it for warmth. Elders still sit beside it, telling stories shaped like spirals and stones. And every so often, if the hush is deep enough, and your breathing is soft, you'll hear the faintest of hums. The sound of presence. Of promise. Of someone, somewhere, whispering, "I'm here." And the coal always replies, "I know." The end. Kiva Thornscrape was used to silence. She worked in the Whisper Vault, a low chamber nestled beneath the archive city of Thread Marrow, surrounded by books made of lichen fiber, bark scrolls encoded with echo runes, and moss-leaved shelves so still they seemed frozen in time. It wasn't a lonely place, but it was quiet. And Kiva liked that. But today's silence was wrong. She stared at the coal fragment sitting in the ceramic cradle on her desk. It had arrived from Breakreach Hollow 5 days ago. Accompanied by no letter, no tag, not even a courier's signature, just a single note etched into its base in trembling script. It cried once. It's crying again. That was all. And yet, it was more than enough. Because the coal did cry. Softly. Not weeping, but releasing a tone that wavered between melody and ache. Not the strong, steady hum of a deepwarm coal, but something thinner. A voice worn down by distance. Kiva placed her hand near it, close but not touching. "What are you trying to say?" The coal shuddered, once. Then went silent. The next morning, Kiva took the coal to the Thread Marrow Hall of Weavings, where the great echo tapestry hung, mapping every known hearth, tone, and resonance across the Underhollow. She found Breakreach at the edge of the weave, a frayed corner, barely connected. Its last confirmed echo, dated 12 cycles ago, pulsed a low thread tone of continuation. Nothing alarming. Just quiet. Since then, the line had dimmed. No warnings. No threads severed. But the silence felt wrong. She asked the hall's steward, a bark-voiced archivist named Ven. "Anyone check on them lately?" Ven raised a brow. "That far out?" "Not in seasons. They've always been a quiet thread. Still echoing in their way." "They're not," Kiva said. She held up the coal. Ven stared. Then shrugged. "You want to chase a dead echo, Thornscrape, go right ahead. But don't expect anyone to follow you into silence." Kiva did not go alone. She had friends. Well, colleagues. First came Ash, a root carver turned hearth-walker, who wore bone-threaded gloves and called coals by pet names. Ash was loud, clever, and deeply annoying, but his coal never went cold. Next was Junal, a listener by trade, trained in fungal resonance. She could hear echo fluctuations through mushroom colonies before anyone else could speak them aloud. Her patience made her seem slow, but Kiva knew better. She was the strongest signal in their group. And finally, Marin, a quiet stone runner whose own echo had never returned from a hollow she never named. She joined them without being asked, as if she'd been waiting for Kiva to make this decision all along. Together, they packed 6 coals, 2 cracked but humming, 4 days' provisions, and a single thread map with the Breakreach tray still half-lit. They left Thread Marrow by second bell. No one stopped them. But no one wished them well either. Because to most, Breakreach wasn't danger. It was emptiness. And emptiness frightened more than flame. Breakreach sat at the very edge of the echo-known Underhollow. The journey to its boundary took 4 days of song-stepping, using ancient echo rhythms to smooth the path ahead. Their coals flickered more than once, sometimes in warning, sometimes in fear. At the 6th rest chamber, they encountered a wall of silence. Not literal. Resonant. The echo of their voices fell flat. Songs did not return. Even Ash's clever jests seemed to die in his throat. Jinnel reached down into the mycelium with her bare hands, closing her eyes. Then looked up. The mushrooms are afraid. Kiva shivered. They pressed on. Breakreach wasn't abandoned. Not exactly. The hollow still existed. Stone paths still curved. Coal chambers still sat in their carved bowls. But everything was dark. Every coal cold. Every echo chime silent. No signs of collapse. No soot. No rot. Just sleep. A hollow that had folded itself in, like a creature curling up in grief. They found the central hearthstone half buried in moss. Kiva knelt beside it, pressing her hand to its surface. No response. But the coal she'd brought, the one that cried, began to tremble. Then hum. Softly. Weakly. Then louder. Until finally, the great coal cracked. And out spilled a single tone. So pure, so old, so filled with ache, that none of them could speak. The Deepwarm hadn't left Breakreach. It had been locked in. The tone from the cracked coal didn't fade. It lingered, a low pulse that vibrated in Kiva's ribcage like a second heartbeat. Maren crouched beside her, running fingers along the cracks. "It's not just a call," she murmured. "It's a chord." Ash tilted his head. "You mean it's layered?" Jinnel stepped closer, touching the earth near the coal with her bare fingers again. "More than that. Something's holding the rest of the song back. This is just the edge." Kiva felt it too. The tone was incomplete, like a melody trailing off before its resolution. But more than anything, it felt afraid. She whispered to the coal, "You're not lost. You're not alone." The coal warmed beneath her hand. And from deep below, the ground sang back. That night, the group followed the coal's resonance downward, through spiraling tunnels lined with cracked shellstone and old fungal channels. The deeper they went, the more the silence shifted from absence to pressure. Finally, they reached it. A chamber unlike any they had seen, domed, perfectly smooth, with no visible source of light, yet softly illuminated from within. At its center stood a thread anchor, one of the oldest forms of Deepwarm resonance. But this one was shattered. Dozens of small stones scattered around it like broken thoughts. Etchings on the wall spelled only one phrase, repeated in different glyphs. "We could not hold it. We locked it instead." Jinnel stepped back, pale. Ash broke the silence. "Hold what?" Kiva looked at the broken anchor. And realized. This wasn't just a chamber of warmth. It was a prison. That night, Kiva couldn't sleep. She sat alone in the chamber, her coal cradled in both hands, listening to the gentle hum of the broken echo. Then the hum changed. The coal flared briefly, and filled her with memory. A vision. Breakreach long ago, thriving, bright, humming with song. But beneath it, something changed. A coal that sang too much. One that didn't echo. One that answered before being called. Some called it a blessing. Others, a threat. And so they did what frightened people do. They buried it. Locked the source deep. And silenced themselves so it could not find its way back. When the vision faded, Kiva was shaking. She looked down at the coal. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And the coal sang one note of forgiveness. The next morning, Jinnel refused to go back into the chamber. "It's not just resonance," she said. "It's conscious." Maren said nothing, but stood at the entrance with her hand resting on her blade handle, watching the darkness like it might blink back. Ash, unusually serious, traced his finger over the broken thread anchor. "You think this is a mind? A thinking coal?" "No," Jinnel said. "Not a mind. A need. Something old. Hungry, not for food, but for belonging. And if we feed it the wrong tone, it won't go back to sleep." Kiva turned to the coal in her satchel. It still hummed. Still wanted to be heard. We can't leave it down here, she said. No, Junal agreed. We just need to listen properly. That evening, they returned, this time with a plan. Kiva, Junal, Ash, and Marin each took a corner of the echo dome, coal in hand. Each tuned their stone to a different Deepwarm frequency: memory, invitation, comfort, and return. Together, they began to sing. Not words. Not even full notes. Just presence. The dome responded, vibrating first in resistance, then in sorrow, then in hope. Cracks in the thread anchor began to glow. The scattered stones around it lit like fireflies in rhythm. And then the room itself breathed. Not air. Tone. The buried echo rose. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a secret. It was a song that had been forced to sleep. And now, it was awake. After the song ended, the light did not fade. The glow in the chamber steadied, warm, amber, pulsing like the heartbeat of stone. The broken anchor did not repair, but it no longer hummed with tension. The fragments had settled into harmony, even if incomplete. Kiva knelt by the now risen coal, larger than her fist, veined with shimmering threads of black and red. It wasn't just warm. It was alive. She didn't hear words. But a feeling entered her, a flood of moments, too layered to name. A child laughing beside a coal fire. A farewell whispered to a sibling before the tunnel closed. A soft sorrow that turned into a lullaby no one had ever sung aloud. Not memory. Not emotion. Remembrance. The coal wasn't broken. It was burdened. And it had locked itself away because no one had ever told it how to carry what it held. They left the chamber in silence. Outside, Junal sat cross-legged and closed her eyes. The mushrooms are at ease now, she said. Whatever it was, it isn't hurting them anymore. Ash gave a low whistle. So we woke it up and it didn't eat us. That's a win. Marin, who had been quiet the entire journey, finally spoke. I know that kind of coal. Everyone turned to her. She stared at her pack, not meeting their eyes. My hollow had one. A long time ago. The echo it held was too strong. Too many voices. The elders called it heavy stone. We buried it. Kiva's breath caught. And it stopped echoing? Marin shook her head. No. I did. They made camp by the old entry tunnel of Breakreach. The coal now pulsed steadily beside their fire, watchful, not needy. Kiva and Marin sat side by side. You knew this might be what we found, Kiva said gently. Marin nodded. I hoped not. But the silence felt too familiar. Did anyone in your hollow ever try to help it? No one knew how. We weren't taught to listen, just to carry coals. Not understand them. Kiva looked to the coal. Not all burdens are meant to be buried. She reached out and gently touched Marin's shoulder. Maybe now you can. Before leaving Breakreach, they relit the central hearth. Not with ritual. Not with song. With presence. Kiva sat by the cracked fire bowl and whispered her name. Marin placed her coal beside the old one. Junal hummed softly, her tone blending with the tunnel root's rhythm. Ash simply sat and smiled. And the coals lit. Not a spark. A steady warmth. Faint at first, but rising with breath. The hearth of Breakreach sang again, not loudly, not proudly, but freely. And slowly, echoes began returning to the chamber. Not just the voices of Kiva's team. Old voices. Long-buried fragments of speech, laughter, lullabies. Echoes that had waited for permission to return. As they prepared to leave, Junal asked, What do we tell Threadmarrow? That Breakreach is back? Ash offered. Kiva shook her head. No. That it never left. It just had something heavier to carry than the rest of us. She took the coal, the heavy one, and wrapped it in cloth, placing it in her satchel. Maren spoke again. "We should name it." "What?" Ash said. "The coal?" "No," Maren said. "The silence. What it held. What we helped it carry." They thought for a while. Then Kiva said, softly, "Let's call it remembrance." And the coal warmed in agreement. Thread marrow had grown while they were gone. New tunnels, new coal posts, new listening wells, signals flowed more clearly than ever before. Even the oldest echo tapestries shimmered brighter with song. But something felt off. Kiva noticed it first at the gate. No one greeted them. Not out of malice, but distraction. Everyone was moving with purpose, speed. No time to sit. No time to breathe. "Where are the evening chants?" Junal asked softly. Ash frowned. "Where are the coal tenders?" Maren stood still for a long time. Something's wrong with the rhythm. They went to the whisper vault. It had been swept, reorganized. Half the resonance stones had been replaced with signal coils, artificial enhancers designed to standardize echo frequency. Kiva whispered to the remembrance coal in her satchel. It did not glow. It went still. They learned the truth that evening, from Ben, the steward who once dismissed Breakreach with a shrug. "We've upgraded," he said, smiling in a way that didn't touch his eyes. "Standardized tones across all hollows. No more mismatched echoes. No more drift." Juno blinked. "Drift is natural." Ben shook his head. "Drift causes disconnection. We're bringing unity. Signal chorus, we're calling it." He gestured to a glowing central node in the Hall of Weavings, once a space of soft threads and moss. Now wrapped in crystal coils and pulsing wires. Now we all echo the same. Maren whispered, "That's not echo. That's control." Kiva didn't speak. She simply held her coal. It was heavy again. And colder. Over the next 2 days, they tried to settle. They failed. The hearthstones of thread marrow no longer responded to personal touch, they activated only when synchronized through the central coil system. Children who once played with echo stones now wore matching tone bracelets that kept them on approved frequencies. Even the mushrooms had gone silent. Jinal's connection with them broke without warning. She wept quietly in the corner of the vault. Ash muttered, "This place is louder than ever and I've never heard so little." Kiva sat beside the remembrance coal and asked it what to do. It answered with a single, low throb of resonance. A tone she hadn't heard since the journey began. Descent. That night, they went below. Below the vault. Below even the thread echo chambers. They followed the old miner's maps, through dust-choked passages and routes long since given up on singing. Until they reached it. A small, forgotten coilless hearth, unused, unregistered, unsensed. A place where echo had once lived on trust. They placed the remembrance coal at the center. It pulsed. Once. Twice. And then sang. The whole chamber filled with memory, not of Breakreach, not of the journey, but of what the Deepwarm had been. A chorus of many tones, not one. A place for dissonance. A home for burdens that couldn't fit elsewhere. Kiva stood. This is the real thread marrow. They didn't confront the signal chorus directly. Not yet. They let the coal do the speaking. Within days, quiet coals and forgotten corners began flickering again, lighting without the chorus, humming songs that didn't match approved harmonics. Some found this terrifying. Others, liberating. A child sang an unregistered lullaby in the wash chamber. A root keeper planted old-style listening fungus beneath the coil towers. An elder cracked her standardized tone bracelet and whispered, "I remember silence that wasn't lonely." Word spread. And Kiva's name began to reappear in echoes, not as a herald or rebel, but as a listener. One who didn't silence remembrance. One who welcomed it. Thread marrow noticed. Within a week, the quiet hearths began to flicker more frequently. Small gatherings formed in unused chambers. Children asked why their coals didn't sound like the central tower's tone. And then the signal chorus responded. First, with messengers, polite, firm, smiling archivists who carried correction scrolls and resonance guidelines. They said it was for consistency. For clarity of tone. When that didn't work, they began to shut down chambers, locking coilless rooms, confiscating unregistered coal, disabling old thread maps. They found the hidden hearth 3 nights later. But it was empty. Kiva, Junal, Marin, and Ash had already moved. Because they knew, the Deepwarm could not be silenced, but it could be driven underground again. And they would not let that happen. Their next hideout was an old tunnel routeway, predating even Threadmarrow's first charter. A place of soft soil, echo-absorbent moss, and weeping stone that remembered stories, not orders. Here, the remembrance coal sang freely. And others began to come. Quietly. Not in protest. In longing. A coal binder from Emberjob. A child whose bracelet had broken and never been replaced. A stone reader who remembered Mia's name and still whispered it during sleep cycles. They didn't want rebellion. They wanted listening. Junal returned from scouting one evening with her hands full of mushroom thread. "They're back," she said, breathless. "I found them near the chorus wellspring. They're trying to grow again." Kiva ran her fingers through the caps, soft, pale, humming faintly. The mushrooms hadn't vanished. They'd just gone quiet, waiting for space to breathe. Ash grinned. "So the network lives." "More than that," Junal said. "It remembers how to heal." That night, Kiva wrapped the remembrance coal in mycelium. And it pulsed brighter than it ever had. 2 days later, a courier arrived. A child. Alone. No bracelet. No uniform. They handed Kiva a small stone etched with a familiar shape. A spiral. The symbol Mia had used. The symbol no one had taught in 2 generations. Inside the stone was a tone, fragile, shaking, but unmistakably personal. Not standard. Not regulated. A whispered message. The coil cannot hold what was never built for wires. If you remember me, walk west. The Deepwarm has already begun again. Kiva looked to her companions. Junal nodded. Ash grinned. Marin already had her pack ready. They didn't storm the signal chorus. They didn't destroy the towers. They simply left. Others followed. Whispers passed through the thread map. Quills cracked. Bracelets fell away. The Deepwarm wasn't ending. It was leaving. What the chorus had built would remain, for those who needed order, certainty, tone without dissonance. But for those who craved something else. Something older. Something alive. There was the spiral way. And Kiva, the coal called remembrance, and the warmth they carried walked toward it. The spiral path led west. Beyond coiled channels, beyond Stone Eater's territory, beyond even the Threadmarrow charts, where tunnels thinned into braided rock veins and the air grew dry with unspoken years. 3 weeks into their walk, they found it. A hollow so still it did not echo. Not absence. Not silence. No. No coals burned. No fungi grew. Not even stone remembered. Ash blinked. This place isn't sleeping. Marin whispered, it's forgotten itself. Kiva held the remembrance coal close. It gave off no light. No song. Like it was holding its breath. They weren't alone. People lived here. Not many. Pale. Quiet. Wrapped in soft dust-colored garments. Eyes wide, smiles gentle, but distant. They welcomed Kiva's group with hospitality, but not recognition. No questions. No stories. No past tense. Junal tried to speak an echo greeting. A young man just tilted his head and said, kindly, There is no need to remember. Maren touched her coal. How long have they been like this? Kiva said nothing. Because the remembrance coal had gone cold in her hands. They discovered it in the center of the hollow, a basin of smooth black glass, carved into the ground. No flame. No light. But faintly humming. Jinnel fell to her knees beside it. This is no hearth. Ash crouched low. No. This is the opposite. A forget-well. It absorbed warmth. Dissolved memory. Maren stepped back. That's why the Deepwarm can't reach this place. Kiva stared at the basin. The edges bore glyphs she didn't recognize, curved shapes that pulsed subtly, as if adjusting themselves to avoid language. Then the coal in her pack pulsed once. A message. A feeling. Not broken. Not lost. Undone. They stayed 5 nights. Long enough to see the effects. On the 3rd night, Jinnel forgot her brother's name. On the 4th, Ash couldn't recall how to tune a coal. By the 5th, even Maren, steel-spined Maren, stood with her arms crossed and said softly, "Why did we come here again?" Only Kiva still remembered clearly. Because she held the remembrance coal against her heart as she slept. And every time she dreamed, she saw Nia. Sitting at a quiet hearth. Not speaking. Just listening. The people of the memoryless hollow offered Kiva a home. "You don't need to carry all that," a woman said, her hand soft on Kiva's shoulder. "No more heaviness. We live in the now." Kiva almost said yes. Her bones were tired. Her thoughts ached. But she looked at her companions, Jinnel writing her brother's name again and again on a piece of slate, Ash fumbling over his own gloves, Maren staring at nothing with fire in her eyes. And Kiva realized. The Deepwarm doesn't just remember pain. It honors it. Without sorrow, there's no need for song. Without burden, no warmth. Without memory, no meaning. She stepped back. "I remember. That's enough." And the remembrance coal flared bright. The hollow grew still. And, for the first time, the forget-well cracked. They didn't destroy the forget-well. They sang to it. A lullaby of remembering. Not to force memory back, but to show the stone that warmth didn't need to be feared. That pain could be held gently. Ash sang low and rough. Jinnel hummed in mushroom harmony. Maren whispered names like prayers. And Kiva stood at the center, holding the glowing coal aloft. The well trembled. Not violently. But like a stone sighing. And then, slowly, so slowly, it echoed. Not a word. Not a command. A tone. Soft. Tentative. Hopeful. The forget-well did not shatter. But it no longer absorbed. Instead, it glowed faintly, cool and even, like a coal that had never known flame but understood warmth. The hollow changed. Not instantly. Not in grand sweeping gestures. But slowly. People began to ask. "What is your name? Where did you walk before here? What is it you dream of?" Simple things. Dangerous things. Because to ask is to allow a place for the answer. And with each answer, echoes began to form. Soft. Fragile. But real. Jinnel taught one child how to shape a listening mushroom with clay. Ash carved a fire bowl, even though the people had no coals, yet. Maren didn't speak much. But each day, she stacked one stone atop another near the forget-well. She didn't say why. She didn't need to. One night, as the hollow slept, Kiva awoke to a low vibration. She pulled out the remembrance coal. It pulsed brightly, then split. Not in fracture. In transformation. 2 smaller coals now rested in her hands, identical in resonance, yet distinct in tone. One hummed the original song of Breakreach. The other, pulsed with a new tone. One she didn't recognize. but felt familiar. She handed the first to Marin, without a word. Marin bowed her head. Her hands did not shake. And Kiva tucked the second close. It hummed again. And this time, she heard a word. Welcome. Their time in the hollow came to a quiet close. The people did not ask them to stay. But many came to see them off. Not with gifts, but with stories, half-shaped, uncertain, beautiful. Some cried. Not from grief. From recognition. And the forget-well, once a basin of loss, now bore a shallow flame that flickered only when someone remembered something true. They called it the hearth of still return. Not a place of command, but of choice. As Kiva and her companions stepped back into the deeper paths, the hollow echoed after them. Not loudly, but with intention. Weeks passed in travel. More coals lit without hands. More mushrooms sang. But with each new path, Kiva felt something waiting. Not behind. Not ahead. Below. One night, under a shale dome, she lay awake and felt the remembrance coal begin to hum again. But differently. The vibration shaped itself into a question. Not words. Not memory. But a presence asking, "What have I become?" It wasn't her coal. It was something deeper. Something old. Something that had watched warmth grow and now no longer recognized it. Jinnel stirred in her sleep. Ash murmured a phrase from a long-forgotten tune. Marin sat up, eyes open. Kiva whispered to the coal. "We'll find you." And the tone answered. "I hope you do." It took them 12 days to find the mouth. The deep root spiral began as little more than a crack in the stone, too narrow for a cart, too subtle to register on any coil-threaded map. But the air was different here, sweeter, like the scent of coal before ignition. Jinnel knelt near the edge, brushing lichen away with careful fingers. "These stones, they've never echoed," she said softly. "Not in centuries. Maybe longer." "They're listening now," said Kiva. The crack opened to a staircase descending in a slow, endless curve. There were no torch marks. No etchings. No history scrawled in glyph or thread. But the further they walked, the more their coals began to hum. Even Marin's. Even the new coal, the one Kiva still didn't understand. At first, the descent felt timeless. Then it began to change them. Ash grew quiet. His usual playfulness softened to thoughtfulness, then to silence. He walked at the back of the line and often hummed, tuneless, slow, uncertain. Jinnel held her fingers pressed to the stone nearly the entire way, as though expecting to catch words mid-breath. Marin never looked behind. And Kiva began to dream. Each night, beneath strange veined ceilings and breathing roots, she saw images too vast to name. A warmth that cracked mountains. A silence that came not from absence, but from awe. The first time someone placed a hand to stone and asked it to stay warm. She awoke each morning with tears in her eyes. Not of sorrow. Of understanding. On the 17th day, they reached it. A chamber, vast, circular, and high-ceilinged. Not carved. Not built. Formed. The walls glowed faintly, though no coal burned. The very air shimmered with memory, old, pure, unfiltered. And in the center stood a pedestal of fused stone. On it rested a coal unlike any they had seen. It didn't glow. It didn't hum. It remembered. Kiva stepped forward, heart thrumming. But as she touched it, the chamber sang. Not a melody. Not a word. A wave of presence. Of unfiltered, ancestral longing. Images swelled, thousands of hollow fires, voices, griefs, hands passing warmth hand to hand. And then, suddenly, fear. The song twisted. Still beautiful. But darker. A hollow destroyed by its own echo. A fire that spread because it was loved too much. A coal that remembered too many voices, and lost itself. Ash stumbled back. Jinnel gasped, covering her ears. Marin's coal dropped from her hands and shattered, yet no sound came. Kiva stood fast. The new coal in her pack, the one that had not yet spoken fully, shone white. It pulsed once. Then said, in pure resonance, "We lit something too large to hold. We called it Deepwarm. But it called itself Origin." They stayed in the chamber 3 nights. Each night, the Origin coal whispered not words, but questions. Kiva did not answer all of them. Some, she couldn't. If memory is fire, can it burn too much? If warmth is shared with sorrow, is sorrow always welcome? If we echo pain to remember, who listens when the echoes stop? Each night, the spiral chamber lit faintly along its walls, as if remembering pieces of itself, too. Jinnel mapped them in thread, slowly, carefully. Ash began to speak again, softly, in poetry. Marin carved a new coal bowl beside the pedestal. And Kiva sat with the Origin. Just sat. Because sometimes, listening is the warmth. On the 4th night in the spiral chamber, the walls began to pulse, not just with warmth, but intention. The resonance took form, not in words, but presence. The chamber became aware. Not like a creature. Like a memory given shape. Each wall lit with a single scene. A young coalkeeper lighting their first fire beside a crying elder. A child holding a cracked coal to their chest, whispering the name of someone long gone. A hollow choosing silence, not because they feared warmth, but because they feared hurting it. And at the center of them all, Kiva saw herself. Not in stone. Not in echo. In continuity. She was not the spark. She was the thread that carried it forward. She was the space that held sorrow without asking it to explain itself. She was the warmth that did not need to be bright, only present. At dawn, Kiva rose and placed the Origin coal back on the pedestal. She did not try to carry it. It had never been hers to hold. Ash stepped beside her. "You're not taking it?" Kiva shook her head. "It isn't meant to move." Jinnel added softly, "It's the still point. The seed. If we carry it out, we might lose its place." Marin simply lit a small coal beside it and whispered, "Let it stay. But let it hear the world again." And Kiva placed the newest coal, the one born from remembrance, beside the Origin. It pulsed twice. Then sang a single, bright note. The spiral answered, gently. "Then go. And echo me kindly." The return journey felt different. Not just upward. Outward. Every coal they passed, every hearth they relit, every echo stone that trembled faintly, felt part of something larger now. They no longer spoke of rescuing the Deepwarm. It didn't need rescuing. They weren't kindling. They were keepers. Not of rules. But of space. Space for warmth. For sorrow. For change. Back at the edge of mapped territory, they found something new. Another spiral. Not stone. Not echo. Not coal. A circle of people, young and old. Holding their own coals, all different, all humming. Waiting. Not for instruction. For a story. Kiva stepped into the ring and knelt. No speech. No announcement. Just a coal offered forward. And the hum spread. 1,000 coals. 1,000 memories. Not in harmony. In dissonance that belonged. Months passed. Years. The signal chorus still held in some places. But even there, coals began to flicker differently. A lullaby hummed outside mapped tone. A root keeper left a stone marked with a spiral where none should have reached. A hollow whispered the name Nia as if she were both ancestor and path. Kiva did not settle. But she wasn't alone. Jinnel returned to the fungi, now blooming in cords. Ash began carving stories into the walls of passage halls, no words, just rhythm. Marin took her coal and walked into the Far East with a single promise: they need warmth too. And Kiva? She walked, coal in hand. Echo behind her. Warmth ahead. Always listening. The end.